and Kvothe's fingers flew across the fretboard. And everyone cried. Or did they? I don't think they cried. I think it's all made up. I think that's the number one indicator that Kvothe is an unreliable narrator. The fact that he sat down at a campfire and played some guitar and everyone started crying. You know, if you met someone in a pub who said, "Oh yeah, I played a song at a campfire and it was like the hardest song in the world to play, and like no one ever tries to play it, but I played it and I played it perfectly, and I even broke a string, but I played it perfectly and everyone cried." I'd think, yeah, all right, mate. Yeah, okay. That definitely happened. Cool story. But aside from unreliable narrators, what else can we learn about the art and the craft of writing from the first page of The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss? We've got the first page here. It's pretty much the prologue. The first page comprises the entirety of the prologue. It's pretty short, and it's a silence of 3 parts. Let's begin. It was night again. The Waystone Inn lay in silence, and it was a silence of 3 parts. Good first paragraph. Very brave first sentence, don't you think? It was night again. Do we need that? Do we even need that first sentence? Let's take that out. How do we feel about this? The Waystone Inn lay in silence, and it was a silence of 3 parts. I think that works, but let's pop that back in there. Why do we think Rothfuss has chosen to open the Kingkiller Chronicles with this first sentence? Well, it was night. It's good to place the time of day. We've got the location here. I like that in the first paragraph we have a location, we have a time of day, so that's good. It's also a short sentence, and I like short sentences. It's really nice to have a variation of sentences within your pages. Have short sentences, long sentences, really long sentences. I find myself leaning towards accidentally writing longer sentences all the time, and that can get really monotonous if all of your sentences are kind of similar length or similar structure. So I always kind of jump at the opportunity, if I can, put in a little sentence. It's really nice with to help with the flow, to make it more kind of winding and weaving. So I think that's probably why he's done it. This word here, again, is interesting. Do you need the again? It was night. Do we need to be told that it was night again? Well, of course it was night again. It's always night again, isn't it? Unless it was the very first night that ever was. It's always going to be night again. So why has he chosen the word night again? And here I think is the key of this sentence. It was night again. This kind of paints this picture of things kind of happening. It was night again. It gives us this impression that maybe it's been night, for a long, long time. The days are rolling by and nothing much is happening. And that's exactly the situation that we're in here. So I think it's a good first sentence. It kind of gives us that impression of we're not being dropped into the middle of something dramatic, right? It was night again. Nothing much is happening. So that's why I think that's here. And then we have the Waystone Inn lay in silence, and it was a silence of 3 parts, which is an echo of the title of the prologue. And if I was a betting man, or if I hadn't already read this prologue a bunch of times, I would say that the rest of this prologue, or maybe the next paragraph, would then go through this silence, right? These 3 parts of silence, because he's promised us, Rothfuss has promised in the title and in the first sentence that he's going to tell us about a silence of 3 parts. What would be annoying is if he called this prologue a silence of 3 parts, wrote this first sentence, and then in the next paragraph started going off and talking about something else and didn't actually address that first thing that he hinted at, the silence. And I've seen writers do this, where they will hint at something, especially in a prologue. they'll hint at something in the first sentence just to kind of draw the reader in, to catch their attention, and then it just kind of gets a bit ignored. What I really like in prologue and in any kind of well-structured scene is when the first sentence and the last sentence kind of tie in with each other. It's almost like a way you might write an essay or something, right? Where you set out like a little mini summary at the top, and then you go through and kind of expand upon that first sentence or that first paragraph. It's a really nice way to structure your scenes, and here that's what the entire prologue is. What we will find is that we are going to go through one by one each of these three silences, and we're going to end with the final silence. So yeah, it's good. Let's move on. The most obvious part was a hollow, echoing quiet made by things that were lacking. If there had been a wind, it would have sighed through the trees, set the inn's sign creaking on its hooks, and brushed the silence down the road like trailing autumn leaves. I think we're going to stop there. So the first thing I want to point out is this word here, lacking. I don't want to go too much into this, but if you've read the series, then you'll know that this word has significance. There's no way, if you're reading this for the first time, that you would pay any attention to the word lacking. But Rothfuss likes to put riddles in his books, and they're fun little language riddles, and this is one of them. I just thought I'd pick up on that. Another thing where do we end? Autumn leaves. Another thing that I want to pay attention to is the words that he's planting in our head. So already we have this concept of quiet, right? We're talking about silence, quiet. We have the at this point, you've got to this point, made by things that were lacking. Okay, there are a million things that could lack, right? A hollow, echoing quiet made by things that were lacking. Well, you could go on and say the inn was lacking elephants, and it was lacking jet fighters. So he's specifically choosing to tell us the things that it's lacking, and one of the things is wind. And the book is called The Name of the Wind. So the things that he's choosing to tell us are lacking are the images he's attempting to put in our head. So we've got wind. We also have autumn leaves. Now, this is a simile, right? The wind, if there had been a wind, it would have brushed the silence down the road like trailing autumn leaves. Well, it could have brushed the silence down the road like any number of things, like sheets of newspaper, or like bits of grass, or any other thing. He's chosen to say like trailing autumn leaves. And again, we can see above us in the cover, we have the wind with the autumn leaves. So even though these autumn leaves aren't in the scene, they don't exist, he's using this as a description, right? As a simile, a comparison, sorry. He's still planting that image in our head. So very early on, we have this idea of silence. We have the idea of wind, autumn leaves, a creaking, the inn sign creaking on its hooks, but the creak, obviously it's not creaking on its hooks. This is very poetic, right? This is why I began with the sound of silence. This whole prologue is talking about the sound of silence, which is inherently a silly thing, right? Silence doesn't have a sound, but that's what we're doing here. It gives you this room to experiment with all the things that silence could be, right? We've got an if there, and I think we'll continue on, but you will notice that there's this repetition here of the way the sentences begin. If there, and then another if there down here. Let's do the second one. If there had been a crowd, even a handful of men inside the inn, they would have filled the silence with conversation and laughter, the clatter and clamour one expects from a drinking house during the dark hours of the night. If there had been music, but no, of course there was no music. In fact, there were none of these things, and so the silence remained. So yeah, he's saying if there had been these things. So he's not actually describing the scene. He's saying if there had been a crowd. He's not saying there was a crowd or a handful of men. He's saying if there had been a crowd. So it's a little bit difficult for us as the reader. He's telling us the things that aren't. He's not describing the inn. He's saying what the inn isn't. But he's still painting that picture in our head of maybe the inn could be filled with people, and he's kind of telling us about the inn in general, that maybe once upon a time there were people in the inn, laughing and having conversations. And then we get to this, if there had been music, but no, of course there was no music. And that's interesting because to the reader that doesn't quite make sense, right? If there had been music, of course there was no music. Well, there's no reason for us to think that of course there wouldn't be music. So that's Rothfuss telling us that there's something quite important about the concept of music here. And again, we've got music, and I think this is another one of those things that he's planting in our heads. Again, on the front cover, we've got a lute, we've got wind, we've got autumn leaves. All of these things are the kind of image that he's trying to put in our head, and is very successful, even though technically none of these things actually exist, right? He's saying if they were there. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Inside the Waystone, a pair of men huddled at one corner of the bar. They drank with quiet determination, avoiding serious discussions of troubling news. In doing this, they added a small sullen silence to the larger hollow one. It made an alloy of sorts, a counterpoint. So this is the second silence. We've already done the first silence. The first silence is things that were lacking. And that's, the crowds and the wind. And then the second silence is they're avoiding serious discussions of troubling news. So it's avoiding things. The first silence is things that lack. And the second silence is things that we're avoiding. And this is useful because it's, first of all, it tells us that there are a pair of men in the bar. But another thing is that it shows us, it's not directly telling us, but it is kind of hinting, by the way, there's troubling news. He could have said, there was troubling news, but they didn't want to talk about it. You could phrase it that way in a much more clumsy, direct way, a more telling way. But he's showing us here that part of the silence is that they're avoiding discussion of troubling news. So it's all very poetic. This entire prologue is very, very poetic. And then here we have an even more poetic idea that the two silences mixed together form an alloy. Alloy, again, is another strong word. I think maybe he's trying to make us think of metals, and maybe that has some relation to the magic system later in the book. Not sure. But definitely this word here, counterpoint, is a music term. So a counterpoint is two separate melodies playing alongside each other. So we've got these two separate silences playing alongside each other. And musical term, again, we've got this hint of music here, and now we've got a music term in our description. It makes me wonder, I've read the series, obviously the first two books. It makes me wonder if Rothfuss is a musician himself. I'm not sure. But if not, then he's done research, right? I don't know how familiar most people are with the term counterpoint. So if he's not a musician, then he's done his research, and that's the kind of thing that you need to do if you're going to write a story about a protagonist who's a lute player. Then you're going to need to learn about music, and I think that maybe that's what Rothfuss has done here. So let's go on. We were two silences down. We've got one more silence to go. The third silence was not an easy thing to notice. If you listened for an hour, you might begin to feel it in the wooden floor underfoot and in the rough, splintering barrels behind the bar. It was in the weight of the black stone hearth that held the heat of a long dead fire. It was in the slow back and forth of a white linen cloth rubbing along the grain of the bar. And it was in the hands of the man who stood there, polishing a stretch of mahogany that already gleamed in the lamplight. And I like this. I like the I like how he's talking about a silence, right? He's talking about this kind of abstract, vague, poetic concept of the third silence. And you might begin to feel it in the wooden floor. So he's using this silence almost like a framing opportunity for him to describe the inn. If he were a less poetic, more kind of lazy writer, you could begin this entire thing just with a description of the inn. There was an inn, and it was called the Waystone Inn, and it had a wooden floor and rough splintering barrels behind the bar, and it had a black stone hearth, and there was a man rubbing the bar, right? You could phrase it that way, but instead he's unveiling this description of the inn by talking about silence, which is a very clever way to kind of squeeze these descriptions in and paint this picture without us even realizing that that's what he's doing. Is he's showing us the inn at this point. We have some fun alliteration here. It was in the weight of the black stone hearth that held the heat. We've got these 3 H's. That's always nice. Don't want to do that kind of thing too much, but it is fun. And it was in the slow back and forth of a white linen cloth rubbing along the grain of the bar. There's a bit of an echo here where we have the bar. You see, we've got the rough splintering barrels behind the bar, and then one sentence later we have along the grain of the bar. So we have 2 sentences that end with the bar. Maybe that's just my editor brain noticing that kind of thing, but if you then followed this by 3 more sentences that ended with the bar, then the reader might start to notice and go, what's up with the bar here? Why do we keep ending with the bar? But I think there is this gap of a sentence between them that puts a little bit of distance between this replication. So I think it's good. I think it's fine. And it was in the hands of the man who stood there, polishing a stretch of mahogany that already gleamed in the lamplight. And to me, this almost kind of echoes back to this idea that it was night again, right? He's polishing a stretch of mahogany that already gleamed in the lamplight. He's telling us there's lamplight, that's good. But it already gleamed. So he's just sat there, just polishing for no reason, right? It's like we're kind of sunk into this routine. So that's good. We're talking about the third silence, but we still haven't revealed what the third silence is yet. We're just looking at the things that it might be in. The man had true red hair, red as flame. His eyes were dark and distant, and he moved with the subtle certainty that comes from knowing many things. I don't really know what that means. What does that mean? The subtle certainty that comes from knowing many things. Well, we're revealing to the reader that this character knows many things. So this sentence serves that one use. It's useful for that. Okay, this guy knows many things. But I don't really know what the subtle certainty that comes from knowing many things means. But it's fun. I mean, it's interesting, right? I know many things, and I don't think I move with subtle certainty. What even does subtle certainty mean? Is that like a quiet confidence, or I'm not sure, but I like it, right? I understand the sentence, even if I don't truly understand it. As I'm reading, I'm not gonna stumble upon this sentence and go, hang on a minute, what does that mean? It just kind of sinks into me. And that's what poetic writing can do. You don't have to fully understand what on earth Rothfuss is going on about with all these silences and things that aren't You just kind of let it wash over you and let him paint that picture in your head. And it's very successful at that. Here we are, the last paragraph. The waystone was his, just as the third silence was his. This was appropriate, as it was the greatest silence of the three, wrapping the others inside itself. It was deep and wide as an autumn's ending. It was heavy as a great river-smooth stone. It was the patient, cut flower sound of a man who is waiting to die. Well, how about that? The last word is die. That's a good last word. If you want to end on a word, die is a good one. Again, we've dived straight into the very poetic, into the poetic realm here. Silence wrapping the others inside itself. We've got as deep and as wide as an autumn's ending. And again, he could have said as deep and as wide as anything. He could have said it was as deep and as wide as an ocean. But he didn't. He said an autumn's ending, which harkens back to this other comparison that he makes up here to autumn leaves. We've got this image of autumn, and autumn's ending. And I think that's probably a metaphor, right? You think of the autumn of someone's life, coming to the winter. It was heavy as a great river-smooth stone. That's an interesting one, river-smooth stone. Now I'm thinking of kind of rushing water. Yeah, I mean, again, it could be as great and as heavy as anything. It was as great as it was as heavy as a great elephant. But no, he chose river smooth stone. I like that. It's very fantasy, right? It's very kind of naturey. And then we come to this line. It was the patient, cut flower sound of a man who is waiting to die. Again, I have no idea what cut flower means, what a cut flower sound is. Cutting a flower, does that have a sound? Well, we've spent the entire prologue talking about the sound of silence. So it's a and this silence is a sound, right? It's a cut flower sound. Okay, so this is the third silence, and it's the sound of a man who's waiting to die. Cut flower here again. We're straight into the poetry. The reader kind of has to guess what this means. They probably won't stick on this too long. They'll just read straight through this sentence and begin chapter 1. They probably won't even think, hey, hang on a minute, do I even know what cut flower sound means? They've just gone on, and Rothfuss has planted this little thing in your head of a cut flower sound. But to me, it's, if you were to look into it, it might mean, if you cut the flower off a plant, then you're kind of removing the beauty. And maybe after you've done that, the plant is waiting to die. We get this idea that this man, maybe the cut flower sound is because he used to be something glorious and beautiful, and now he's had something terrible that's happened, and now he's waiting to die. I don't know. But I like it. It's unique. And it's very poetic, and that's Rothfuss in a nutshell, really. This is about as poetic as he gets. This entire thing is written in the omniscient perspective, so it's very poetic. It's not flowery though, and it's not, what do they call it, purple prose, where you use these big $10 words and all the sentences are very winding and complex. Rothfuss isn't that kind of writer. He uses very simple, elegant language. You won't often encounter complex words, but you do get these very poetic kind of concepts. And this kind of thing is really hard to write, which is no wonder why he's been writing this last one for the last 10 years. And there's no sign of it ever coming out, because this kind of writing is really, really difficult to do. It's difficult to do it successfully. You can try, you can give it a go, but if you fail at this kind of thing, then you fail really hard. It's very easy to lose the reader in this kind of very abstract way of writing. And if you lose the reader, then especially in the prologue, like it's really risky to do this kind of thing in a prologue. If you lose the reader in a prologue, then they're gone. They're not going to read your book. So if you're brave enough and you want to set your scene in a fun way, then you can come up with something similar to the way that Rothfuss has done this. You know, he's describing a scene for us, the Waystone. We've got our protagonist, even though the protagonist hasn't been named yet. We've got the mood and the tone. We've got these ideas of autumn, a man who's waiting to die. We've learned a lot from this, but it's written in a very fun and unique way, and I think that's why people often talk about how much they love Rothfuss's prose, and I love it too, and I can't wait for the next one to come out. So I think we'll leave it there. Yeah, great prologue. If you haven't read Name of the Wind, definitely pick it up. It's an amazing series. And if you want to read something that I've read, I'll put some links in the description below. And yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. All right, nice one. Catch you later. Bye.